Hello class, welcome to this unit, event-driven programming, and your lecturer. I will be taking you through the units. My name is Elena Mwai. So previously we covered on a number of topics. If I recap, you remember we covered in event-driven programs, we covered control structures, we covered loops, and today we are going to have a continuation where we are going to look at functions. We are going to look at functions in Visual Basic, which is the program that we are using to learn. So if we can just move on. The various topics that we are going to cover under the functions in Visual Basic, we are going to look at the function definition. We are going to look at the Visual Basic inbuilt functions. They are those functions that are inbuilt within that program. And then we also have to look at other functions. And remember that in this program or in this application, there are so many functions that you can use to create various business operations that can be done using this program. So we start by looking at the definition of the program, so function. If for us to understand what is a function, we have to first go back to defining a procedure. So a procedure is a group of statements that together perform a task when called. You know, we have talked about calling of functions. So after the procedure is executed, the control returns the statement calling the procedure. So a function is basically a type of a procedure or a routine. In our previous lessons, we learned about procedures and the various types. So a function is also similar to a subroutine, but a function returns a result. So that is the basic or one of the distinction when it comes to functions, because functions will return a result. At the end of the day, you are trying to do something. You are trying to create a program to generate results. And then the other thing to note is that functions accept arguments, just like subroutines. So in Visual Basic, remember we talked about the various versions of Visual Basic that we usually have that we can use. So in Visual Basic, most of the Visual Basic application, they have what you call inbuilt functions. So many inbuilt functions offered by Visual Basic falls under various categories, and we have now these three categories where we have the date function, the date and time functions, the format functions, and the string functions. So as we go on with our lessons, we'll be looking at some of those functions. We can start with the date and time functions. Previously, we have written programs. You want to write a program, an application, a business operation, and you want the output to display this information. So Visual Basic lets you store date and time information in specific date time, and also provides a lot of date and time related functions. So remember, in programming, we say that you can make the computer do whatever you want it to do. You can make the computer display the information that you want. Remember, we also said that we say in this era of computer that there is no application, there is no scenario that we may not be able to actually computerize. There is no scenario that we cannot be able to use an application. And now Visual Basic being one of the applications program that we use to create business applications. So the date and time functions are very important in all business applications. Remember, these days you want real-time application as the user is using a computer, as you are in the various users who are using these softwares that are created. they want to have maybe real-time up to the second information of what they are doing. You want data to be captured, you want display, you want the interface to appear. So date and time are internally stored as numbers in Visual Basic. So the decimal points represent the time between. We have these values between, that is for the hour, the minutes, and the second. Of course, from the lower up to the highest, which we have the hour, the minute, and the second. So we are saying from 0 hour up to the 23rd hour and 59 seconds inclusively. So the system current date and time can be retrieved using the now, date, and time functions in Visual Basic. That is the three, the now, date, and time functions. So the now functions retrieves the date and time, while date function retrieves only the date. So if you want to retrieve date and time, you are expected to use the now function. If you want to retrieve only the date, then you use that. And or if you want to retrieve only the time function, you can use that function. So for example, to display both the date and time together, we can use a message box to display that. So for example, I have sample code. We have message box. Later I'll be talking about the message box function. We have the message box, the current date and time of the system is, and I have ampersand now. So this message box, I'll use it to display the current time. So for example here, we'll move to our program, and I have that code. This code, I've just put it in the form, the private sub. Of course, we have gone through the introduction and we said where we code. You know, Visual Basic, there are those codes that are already inbuilt there, and then you have those codes that you have to add. So for example, I have added just this code, message box, the current date and time of the system is, and the ampersand, that is just a small code. So if we run that, we can have the message box displays the time. So the current date and time of the system is date 3/23, 2020, and we have the time there up to the time that is being displayed there. So that is the date function that is inbuilt. So I'm just retrieving that function because it's an inbuilt function in Visual Basic. So class, for this information, of course, you know you are going to get it in the notes. The codes that I write, all of them will be available in your notes, and you'll be able to access it. So there are various ways that you'd like to display that information that you have said. So we have the calculation and conversion functions that are related to date and times. You can use these functions. So for example, the date add function returns a date to which a specific interval has been added. So that is when we are using intervals. We have date difference functions that will be used to return a long date type value specifying the interval between the two values. So later we'll be using these functions in writing our projects, and we'll choose from these functions. We also have the date part that returns an integer containing the specified part of a given date. We have the date value functions that converts a single string to a date. And we have the time value functions that is used to convert a single string to time, because we have said you can have date or time. And then you have the date series function that returns a date for a specified year, month, and date. So later in our next lesson, we'll be using some of those functions. Remember, as projects, as work, even assignment, you are given information, and then you're supposed to use some of those functions to display the information. So we have the other function called the date difference function. So the date diff function returns the interval between two dates in terms of years, months, or days. So you may have two different dates in your applications and you want to return the interval. So the syntax that we'll be using is we have the date diff for the difference. We have interval and then the date 1, date 2, because we are returning the interval between two dates. And then you have the first day of week and the first day of the year. So we'll be coming back to that in our next lessons. We have the format function. The format function accepts a numeric value and converts it to a string in the format specified by the format argument. So the values that you have, the string that you have, can be used to convert. So we have the syntax that we'll be using. The syntax that we'll be using for that, we have format into bracket expression, format, then you have first day of week and first week of year into bracket. So we'll be referring to these programs. This is just for noting. So in explaining that statement, the statement that you have, so the part for expression, this part for expressions means is required any valid expression as far as we are using information regarding the program. So any valid expression you can put there. Then the format here, which we have said is optional in the program, you can either put it or not. So here you put a valid name or user-defined format expression. We have first day of week is also optional in this in that program, where you put a constant that specifies the first day of the week, and then you have first week of year is also optional, a constant that specifies the first week of the year. So note those will be very important in our later lessons, where we'll be now implementing those functions. Next, our class, we can go on and look at the other function that we use, which is the message box function. We have used message box in various programs, the programs that we have learned. So the objective of message box is to produce a pop-up message box and prompt the user to do something. You know, we all use software in so many ways. So sometimes event-driven, we are learning event-driven programming. So we click, we move mouse, all those events that we talked about. So sometimes depending on what, whether it's a button that you have pressed, so the programmer will code maybe the information that needs to appear once the message box is clicked. So it prompts the user to click on a command button before he or she can continue. So the format that we use for message box, we have your message equals to message box into bracket prompt, and then you have the style and the style value and the title. So to understand now this statement, we have that the first argument, which is the prompt displays the message in the message box. It displays the message in the message box because we are going to put a message inside the message box. But within this message box function, we have arguments. Remember, we said that functions returns arguments. So the second part, which is the style value, will determine what type of command buttons will appear on the message box. I'm going to give you now the various command buttons that we use. So what type of command buttons will appear. And then the last part, which is the title argument, will display the title of the message board, because a message box have a title or have that label. So going now to this part, you say the style value, which will determine, the style value will determine which command we are going to put. So the style values that we use in Visual Basic, we have the style values that you put in your program. For example, 0, means VB, OK only, and usually displays the OK button. So depending on what your message box is doing, you will know what to choose. Value 1 is VB OK cancel, which will have the OK and the cancel button. 2, we have VB abort, retry, ignore, abort, retry, and ignore button. So we'll be using all these. This is for your reference purposes. So we have an example of a code for our message box. We have an example of a code. We code this code in the button. In the previous lessons, we learned about controls. We learned about the various controls that we have. We have the text boxes, we have the labels, we have the buttons, and most of those things that the users need to do, you put the code in the button. So we assume in this program, of course, in your VB application program, you will have to create a button. So in this case, I have button 1. Remember, we said you can either rename it, or depending on, as you are creating projects, you may need to rename these buttons. As here I'm creating one program, running it, I may not need to change that name. So in button, the button 1 that I have added, so in the click of the button, the codes that I have put is as displayed here. So we have dim test message as integer. So this is where we are declaring our variables. We talked about that in our previous lessons. And we say that text message, the message that you want to be displayed, you have message box into bracket, click to test 1. So that is the style. We remember we said VB1, that is style 1 for OK and cancel. So that means I'll have those 2 command buttons. And you have the return message there, test message. So if test message is equals to 1, then message box.show, you have clicked the OK button. Else message box.show, you have clicked the cancel button. In our previous lessons, as I said, we looked at the control structures and we used the if functions. So as we are using it here, I know that you understand the use of the if function. So here it can be implemented, because as we go on learning, we go on adding these codes. So we are going to display that output in our code. So for that program, we run it in Visual Studio. So the code that we have displayed, we run it under a button click. So we have a button, and then we have in the event click, we run this program. So I have just put that program there. And on running that program, we see the message box being displayed. I've just, of course, as you are programming, you can rename your controls, the names, depending on the functions that you are doing. But for now, because you are learning about message box, so I have there as the message box as the label. So if I click on this message box button, we see now the command button I say that will appear, and it says click to test. And we have OK and cancel because I had used VB1. So I click OK. And what we had displayed is once the user clicks OK, this is the message that you be displayed. According to our program, we had said you have clicked the OK button. Remember, we are just trying to show how this works. So in your application, in creating your applications, you expected that maybe you have some information that needs to appear. Remember, you just need to code that information in the program. You just need to change the information that needs to appear there. And there I can also click OK. If I also run that button again, and this time I do not click on OK, I will click on cancel, and the message I get there is that you have clicked the cancel button for that. So make sure that you understand the code. As we see, it is not that complicated, because you just need to insert the information that you need to change depending on the applications that you are creating. You want to create a program to do what? So depending on what you're doing, then you are going to change those values there. So the same, that program will be available to you for your references. The program will be available to you. Now, to make that message to look more sophisticated, there are functions or there are icons that you can add. I'm sure you have all used many softwares, and you go clicking buttons, there is that information you get through use of what you call icons. So you can add an icon beside the message. So there are 4 types of icons available. We have the VB critical, and we have, of course, the icon we use for that. You have VB question for question mark, depending on what that message box is displaying. We have VB exclamation, and we have VB information. So we have the values that you will be using. So under the values, you will modify that. So in our next program, now we have modified the program, and now we want to use those commands. So still, remember, from here is where we have our program. We are still coding this program under the button click. So when you are in the object code of the program, for the button, for a control button, this is the code that we put. So for example, the same information we deemed text message as integer is the same values that you're using, and text message is equals to message box, click to test, and then you have, yes, VB no cancel plus VB exclamation mark and text message. So for that, now we have that icon being displayed. You will have that icon, and for example, here we're saying if text message is equals to 6, then message.show, you have clicked the S button. Then if text message or test message is equals to 7, then messagebox.show, you have clicked the no button. Else messagebox.show, you have clicked the cancel button. So this is just a modification of the program, and of course I expect that you will also try to run this program. Just put it and run it, and you'll be able to see the output, which is very clear for you. So we can continue with the other function, which we call the InputBox function. The InputBox function. This function in Visual Basic is used to display a message box where the user can enter a value. So you want that once you click a button, a certain button, the user will be able to enter some values for depending on the application that you're creating. So the structure that we use, or the syntax, we have Microsoft.visualbasic.inputBox into bracket prompt title default text, and you have the X position and the Y position. So this one is depending on the value, the versions of Visual Basic that you are using. So if you are using other versions of Visual Basic, you may need to change that. But the other values will remain. So the prompt, that is the message that is displayed normally as the question mark, this part of the prompt. The input box is, of course, the function. The prompt gives the message that will be displayed normally as a question, because we have said an input box is used by the user to enter values. So if you need the user to enter a value, of course, you first have to ask them what they need to enter. And the title is the title of the input box. Just like we have message box, you have to put a title. And the default text, that is the default text that appears in the input field, where users can use it as their intended input or they may change the message if they wish to do that. The X and Y positions, this gives the coordinates on your screen where that input box is supposed to be. So these values, X and Y positions, you can actually change them. So we have an example of our program. We have an example of a program that you're going to run. So still, I'm going to use a button. So in the button click, so the code that we put in our button click event, so dim user message as string, because it's a message, we use data type string. Remember in our previous lessons, we have covered all data types that we use in Visual Basic. So dim user message as string, and we said that user message is equals to microsoft.visualbasic.input, depending on the version that we're using. And the message is what is your message? That is the value that the question mark that the system will ask the user is what is your message. So that is what you are putting it there with a question mark message. Then the entry form is now enter. You have the program now gives the user an interface to enter their message. So we have enter your message here. I have given, this is now the X and Y position, which we can have that as value. So we can say 500 and 700. So if the user, the message, that's why we're saying if user message greater than or equal to, or you have those signs, then message box.show is user message. That is whatever is being displayed there. Else message box.show no message. So this code is evaluating if the user types some message, then that is what will be displayed. If the user just runs the button and no message is displayed, I mean the user does not type any message there, then the display or the message box that you'll have. So remember here we are using the input box, and then you also have to have the message box, because the message box displays, we say no message if the user does not type any message. So our expected output, the input box will appear as shown in the figure below when you press the command button. We can just display that in our program. So for our program here, the codes now, we put it still using a button click. So in the button click, we have a program there that we have displayed, which I have just typed it in my program. So I run that. And so we have the input message, the button, I just renamed it to that. So if I click on my input box message, and remember this information is what we have put in the code. We said that the form, the message, the form will be message entry form, and you have what is your message there, and you can display the message. You can write the message that you want there. And you click OK. So the input that the user input is supposed to be displayed there. So depending on the applications that you want or whatever you are trying to create, we can see it's going to appear there. So our entry form, that is what now our program is displaying there. So for now, class, we have come to the end of our topic today. We will cover up to there. For the notes, the programs, they are also detailed information on what you're supposed to cover. We are also going to have an assignment, which I'll be sending to the link when you go to the online portal. All the text exercises, the assignment you're supposed to use to do, depending on what you have found today, you will use them. You will access them from there. So thank you, and we meet next time for our lesson.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.